Hello again, folks. Hope you're all still keeping well, hey. I recently messaged a farmer friend of mine to see if there was any pigeons in the barley, and he rung me straight back. Yep, he had pigeon problems, but not in the barley, in the sheds, and they were dunging over everything, including the combine which he was busy trying to get ready for this year. I was only in the door when I spotted several up on the rafters, the first of which, this one, I went to shoot, only to realise, I hadn't put the magazine in the gun yet. So I frittered about getting the ammo box out of my pocket, lifting the magazine out of it and loading it into the rifle. And while I was doing this, the pigeons were looking down on me, probably thinking, oh, that's your man back in to fix that machine. Fat chance of that happening, hey. Though I think they realised I wasn't a mechanic after dropping that first one and started exiting the building through every little crack and crevice they could find. I thought I had enough room to squeeze a shot off by that beam into that bird, but hit the beam instead, so I repositioned myself to get a clearer shot. With two birds down and the rest of them beating a hasty retreat, I decided to walk round the back of the combine and have a look at the gable wall behind me. And sure enough, there was a bird up in the gable wall that hadn't quite realised that I hadn't got a clue about how to fix farm machinery. I think the shot hit a little low, as the bird was able to fly round the shed and out the door, only to smack headlong into another shed door across the courtyard, where I found it. Yep, a low strike, though I have to give the shed door some of the credit. That was a hard hit. While lifting the birds, I could easily see some of the mess they were making, though this was going to be nothing compared to what I was about to find later. This sliding door leads to another shed, which had calves in it last year, but there's nothing in it at the minute, though I did suspect there'd be one or two feral pigeons hiding up in the rafters. And sure enough there was, though they were getting quite nervous at the sight of me. Well, could you blame them really? That's another one down, though I had a bit of a mishap with the next one.
Missed. Sticky safety catch.
Yeah, sometimes with my Super 10, if you squeeze the trigger with the safety catch on, the shear drops but the rifle doesn't fire, so when you switch the safety catch off, bang. Though I made up for it with that nice little shot over the gutter. Unfortunately though, it looks like I need a follow-up shot on the other bird. Right, it's time to squeeze my 13 stone in here to see if there's any other birds I couldn't see from the doorway. And sure enough, there was a couple in the bay next door. I spooked the second bird, but thankfully it resettled again, a little further back into the shed. I gathered up the birds I'd shot before heading round into the other shed, and that's when I noticed how much dung there was lying on the floor. Yes, I know there's calf dung in here too that hasn't been cleaned out yet, but look at the thick white lines of dung up and down the floor and under where all the birds have been roosting. It's near a foot wide in places. And I'll just set this little lot here while I go and retrieve the other two birds from the neighbouring shed. Though the easiest way for me, without opening a lot of big doors, to get into that house is to go through the cattle pens, which proved a bonus here as I spotted another bird.
Empty, would you credit?
Yeah, I forgot to count my shots and the magazine was now empty. So I had a bit more flapping about trying to get the other magazine out of my pocket and into the rifle, while the calves licked around my jumper and pulled at my trousers. Thankfully, it was a very patient pigeon. I know my mother always told me I shouldn't play with my food, but they started it. Oh, feet don't fail me now. Before I went any further on, I reloaded both magazines, just to save any more embarrassing moments. I think the last time I was here, this shed was full to the throat with straw bales, and probably will be again pretty soon. I'll just add this little lot to the pile before checking out that calf shed again, just to see if any of the birds have returned. And sure enough, there's one on the left hand side wall. So, thinking this was going to be a fairly productive spot, I decided to hang a bit of camouflage net over the doorway, and found an old rickety chair lying beside the combine with a lot of nuts and bolts on it that I'm sure they don't really need, to sit on and wait for the birds to come in. But the first bird back into the shed actually landed up in the rafters behind me, though I should have spent more time getting a more stable shooting position because I rushed the shot, and yes, I missed and only plucked a few feathers from the bird.
I think I missed.
After a while of waiting, I got itchy feet and wanted to see what else was about the farm. Plus, I could hear a lot of bird activity coming from the cattle sheds. And, sure enough, I spotted a jackdaw in the middle of the yard about 35 yards away. It was a solid hit, but it still managed to fly about 10 yards before dropping dead beside some silage bales. Then I noticed another jackdaw poking through the silage just inside the shed door at about 37 yards away. I was fairly chuffed with that shot, but it seemed to scatter the rest of the birds, So I decided to go back round to my comfy chair and see if any more ferals would come into the shed. Now, I'd been waiting quite a while and had closed my eyes to meditate on the complexity of airgun ballistics when a fluttering of wings woke me from my meditation. I waited there for a wee while longer, but unfortunately that was the last bird to come into that part of the farm. So I decided to walk round and pick up the couple of jackdaws I'd shot earlier. And as I was lifting the jackdaw, I noticed one last pigeon up in the rafters of the cattle house. I tried to use the steel beam to give myself as steady an aim as possible, but the wind outside was just buffeting me about, and I tried to take the best shot I could, but it wasn't good enough. So I decided to quickly move inside the shed, just out of the wind, and use a gate as a rest. Which seemed to work, even if the calves were licking at me. The second shot looked good, but he was still on his feet. So I shot again. And again. To be honest, I think it was quite dead by this point and had just wedged itself into the corner, and that's why it hadn't fallen. But I took one last shot at the head just to make sure. I know the pigeon was dead, but I was still sort of annoyed at myself that it had taken so many shots to get the job done. Thankfully, by the time I had walked round, the bird had fell out of its little corner, and boy, it had some pellet holes in it. So I lifted it and the couple of jackdaws I'd shot before finally calling it quits. Oh, and the little red combine the farmer was working on? Yep, the birds had it absolutely claried too. Well folks, I hope you enjoyed that, and hopefully before long we'll get back again, as there definitely seems to be more work to be done. But until then, take care and look after yourselves, hey.